I'm Jono Buchanan, and in this video we're going to learn about the Haas effect. Now this is a really interesting technique when you want to have your sounds approach you from a particular direction. Now you might already be thinking, well, isn't that what the pan dial's for? Well, kind of. The interesting thing about the Haas effect is what it does is it gets to the heart of exactly how we perceive sound. Our ears are amazingly attuned, and what they're extremely good at is detecting all kinds of things, including direction. If you think about it, when we're out and about in the world, when we're walking around, we don't just hear an approaching car, we can hear the direction that it's coming from. Regardless of whether it's behind us, in front of us, if we close our eyes, we can determine its volume, but also its place. And the interesting thing about sounds within our mix is that when we're looking to try and spread things out or try and get more stereo-ness into our mixes, the Haas effect can be a really interesting way to achieve it. Before we apply it to a sound within our mix, let's listen to the track we'll be working on. Okay, what I'm going to do is to solo this little analog pluck sound up here at the top, which is coming from retro synth and is an amazingly straightforward sound, which is playing the same thing every single time it plays. Okay, so what I've got is this little pluck sound. Now, what we've effectively got is a stereo sound from retro synth, but because the two channels of this sound are identical, it might as well be mono. There's no width to this sound, there's no reverb making it wider, literally nothing is making this sound different in the left and right channels. And as a result of that, even though there is effectively a left and a right channel, they're sort of being summed down to achieve this kind of very mono-centric sound. So to achieve the Haas effect, what I'm going to do isn't to pan the sound to the left or to the right, but what I'm going to do is to delay one of those channels by a very small amount, a few milliseconds. And the reason I'm going to do that, and this is central to how the Haas effect works, is our ears are so good at detecting where we hear a sound from first, we will place it there. In other words, if I delay the right-hand channel by a few milliseconds, the sound will arrive on the left first, and our brain will say, okay, that sound is on the left. And immediately that's where we'll associate that sound from being, even though we're still using as much volume in the right-hand channel just a few milliseconds later. It will sound louder on the left. Now to achieve this, what I'm actually going to do is to use a plugin, a delay plugin, but rather than a regular delay, what I'm going to do is to use the sample delay. And what this allows me to do is to delay the left or right channel in either samples or in milliseconds. And I'm going to select the millisecond option here. Now, generally speaking, the moment you get above about 40 milliseconds, there'll be an audible delay between the left and right hand channels, and your brain will start hearing that as two separate sounds. But if we introduce just a little bit of delay on the right hand side, let's say 15 milliseconds, when I play this sound, we'll hear it on the left and then the right, even though, as I say, the volume is still matched in both channels. Now, before I press play, I know you're dying to hear it. Make sure you're listening on good headphones or a good pair of speakers, because you won't perceive this effect if you're listening through a much less good pair of speakers. Okay, so you can hear that as I change the delay time, we're hearing that sound on the left. I'm going to do the same thing again, and this time I want you to look down at the bottom left-hand corner where you will see that there isn't a volume offset. The two sides of this are as loud as they were before, and yet our ear is drawn to the left. It helps if I go back to the beginning. Okay, now in the context of the mix, what's interesting about that when we play it with everything else is just that sense that almost in a way that becomes almost enhanced by the fact that there are other instruments around it. Okay, now again you might be thinking, okay, well what's the optimum delay time for one channel? Well, there is no fixed answer to that. It will depend on the tempo of your track, it will depend on the sound that you're running through this effect, and by the way, here I am playing it in a kind of EDM context, but it's worth trying with all kinds of sounds. If you want to take a sort of mono recording and find a way to spread it out, pass it through the stereo sample delay and find a way to just split those channels out a little bit, and you'll just suddenly discover that you get that kind of width. But also you'll find on stereo sounds that nevertheless are very mono-centric, like the one that we're using here. This is a really interesting way of being able to play with that sense of space. One thing to watch out for a little bit is that sometimes you might get a slightly phasey quality to the sound if you happen to find a bit with a kind of electronic oscillator like in the sound that we're using, where suddenly you get a little bit of sort of phase cancellation as one channel takes over from the other. But again, just use your ears and just have a find a sweet spot that sounds right to you. What I am going to do is just push the delay far enough that we begin to hear separation, so that rather than hearing one sound which is kind of smeared across the mix, instead we hear two definitive separate parts to the sound. And we're there now. When in fact, from about sort of 40 milliseconds onwards, there is now a definite gap between those two sounds. Now, that might sound really good too, but this isn't the Haas effect anymore. But that has given me an idea. So what I'm going to do is to go with this kind of no delay on the left-hand channel and about sort of 30 milliseconds or so on the right. But what I'm also going to do is to bring in a little reverb that I had set up for this sound. I'm going to just put a loop around these 8 bars. So I'm going to turn up the send to this reverb. Now this reverb is an interesting one because it's got a tape delay before it. The tape delay is producing a quarter note delay, which means that effectively what we're getting is a whole quarter note before the sound speaks, and of course the sound is being triggered into a chroma verb, which means that effectively we've got a delay which is coming after the original dry signal. And what I'm wondering is, if I put a sample delay, which will now be obviously at the top of my most recently used plugin list up here, because I used it on that first channel, so there it is, I've inserted it above the tape delay. What I'm wondering is, and again, this won't be a true Haas effect style offset, but again, what I'm going to do is to select a millisecond offset. I've got my dry sound happening on the left first, and then it's crossing across to the right. And what I'm interested to do is to see if I can smear this reverb by keeping maybe the right-hand signal undelayed and offsetting the left-hand side quite a lot. Let's just take it up to about 120 milliseconds to start with. And now what's happening is it's kind of clattering across to the right to the left. Now again, this isn't the Haas effect, but it's kind of a technique inspired by that idea of separating the right and the left-hand channels. Let's put that into the mix and let's see if we can find something which feels like it's kind of in time with the project. Okay, obviously it helps that my project's at 120 BPM, allows me to calculate that obviously 250 milliseconds and 125, therefore are going to be divisions of a second long delay, and so therefore it's easy for me to calculate something which feels like it's kind of quantized in terms of this behavior. But what this gives me is this really interesting smeary effect. There's one thing I want to try. I'm going to come back to the original sound as well, and again I'm going to just play around with the kind of Haas effect in real time by recording some automation for the delay on the right hand side. So what I'm going to do is to just come into latch mode, and I'm just going to create some offsets so that the sort of smearedness from the left to the right hand side is changing from one instance of this Pluck to another. I might solo it as we put this information down. Now, obviously that's going to be really subtle, but again, back in the context of the track overall, I think it might be interesting. So what we've done with this video is to understand what the Haas effect is. It's effectively a way of being able to split the left and right hand sides of a stereo sound in order to be able to perceive a better sense of direction. Our ears are so good at detecting the first place we hear a sound from that we immediately assume that the whole of that sound is coming from that place. And so therefore, it's a really interesting way of being able to place a sound within the mix. But what we've also done is to get a little bit creative with the idea of that and how we might apply it in a few different ways within a mix.